The RDR2 Epilogue is one of the greatest conclusions and setups in gaming. When you played the Epilogue, did you ever get that jarring feeling where something feels empty but also full with emotion? That's how I think Rockstar designed the Epilogue. The Epilogue is an amazing conclusion to the main story of RDR2 and the perfect setup for Red Dead Redemption 1 and John Marston's story. Today, we're going to be looking into detail as to why this is the case, why it's such an amazing conclusion and setup. We all know that the Epilogue is a complete shift away from the outlaw life we experience as Arthur Morgan. We play as John Marston as he is trying to build a new life with Abigail and Jack. Whilst many players find the Epilogue quite boring, the Epilogue intentionally shifts our expectations away from action-filled scenes with missions that are more like basic chores and tasks. So how did Rockstar design the Epilogue to be an amazing conclusion to the main story? When I played the Epilogue, I noticed that Rockstar focused heavily on the narrative structure, specifically a slow burn to show that times have changed from the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th. The slow burn starts as an introduction to the Epilogue. Part 1 starts approximately 7 years after the main story, where it forces John Marston into an honest, repetitive, and hardworking life as he works at Pronghorn Ranch. Abigail is trying to get John to forget his past and live a new life of following the law, raising his son, and owning a ranch themselves. But as things progress, we find that John is itching for the action that he once had in his life. Specifically, the slow burn is a contrast from John's chaotic past and his attempts to earn redemption, which is framed as a quiet, tedious process rather than a grand cinematic gesture. And by the end of part 1 of the Epilogue, and just before American Venom mission, John does achieve redemption. He goes buys a piece of land, Peach's Hope, by taking loans from the bank rather than forcing his way into the area.
Ah, it's you, the man with 2 names and no past. Come on in. How'd you make out?
Well, let's just say there are no more squatters.
Okay. Now we own you, Mr. Marston, and we own Mr. Milton too, and we own your property. But you can buy your freedom each week. Eventually, you will be a homeowner.
However, when John, Sadie, and Charles go and hunt down Micah Bell on Mount Hagen, I don't see this as his redemption, but a destruction of his hard work to achieve redemption that he got in Epilogue Part 1 and the start of Part 2. As when he finally kills Micah, this attracted the law, specifically Agent Edgar Ross. John left behind evidence, specifically killing Cleet and Strawberry during what he believed was avenging Arthur Morgan. But this was actually him ignoring Arthur's wishing for John to leave the outlaw life behind and never look back. Seeking this revenge meant John broke that final promise he gave to Arthur in 1899. With Edgar Ross in the Bureau of Investigation, which was founded in 1907, discovering Micah's body, this triggered a series of events that outed John Marston as still being alive. It was never announced that John Marston had died, but in the mission Bare Knuckle Friendship, where Uncle and John go and find Charles in Saint Denis, Charles had believed John died long ago.
John? You're... I'm alive. So are you. So's he.
That's Uncle?
What are you doing?
I don't know. I'm alive.
Uncle thought maybe you was in some sort of trouble.
Kind of, just... I don't know. I'm throwing fights for a few dollars.
Throwing fights?
Sure.
Now, if we expect most people to act the same way Charles did, an 8-year jump between the destruction of the Vanderlyn gang and the Epilogue would get most people to believe that John Marston was dead and was never heard of again. So Edgar Ross probably thought that John Marston, the other enforcers, and the members of the Vanderlyn gang were dead. So if John didn't go after Micah, he probably would have lived a peaceful life where he would grow old and probably see grandchildren. So John's redemption is a slow burn into a mature man who cares for his family. But the irony of it all is that he goes back to his roots as an outlaw, where he kills Micah Bell and ultimately sets the law on him again, thus destroying his redemption. The RDR2 Epilogue concludes the main story perfectly. It wraps up the journeys of characters such as Micah Bell, Sadie Adler, and Charles Smith. It leaves players with John Marston, who now has access to the entire world of RDR2. But Rockstar didn't just create a great conclusion, they also made the perfect setup for RDR1. The RDR2 Epilogue created the perfect setup for Red Dead Redemption 1. By the end of the Epilogue story, we are at Beach's Hope, near Blackwater. And by the start of RDR1 in 1911, we are in Blackwater, where Agent Edgar Ross and Archer Fordham force John Marston to hunt down his old gang. Focusing on the character being John Marston, John's character is probably 75% of who he is in RDR1 by the end of the Epilogue. Things conclude in 1907, and RDR1 starts in 1911. Within 4 years, John most likely changed quite a lot, focusing on his family and Beach's hope. In the epilogue, John is a clumsy man, trying to make his way through regular life and having difficulties with his relationship with Abigail. By the time RDR1 comes around, John is a highly intimidating, intelligent, and extremely competent person. John in the epilogue is extremely naive. He often finds himself in situations that can be easily avoided, but end up having extreme consequences. Whilst I do think he made the right decisions in the epilogue at Pronghorn Ranch to protect it from Mr. Abel and the Laramie gang in the mission Jim Milton Rides Again, John going after Micah was a mistake, and 4 years after the events of the mission American Venom, John has learned that the past always catches up, causing him to adopt a deeply pragmatic and cynical worldview. Something that I did want to touch on was the story setup, more specifically why there is a gap between the end of the epilogue and the start of RDR1. The epilogue ends in 1907 and RDR1 starts in 1911. First of all, before we get into the gap, the end of the epilogue places John Marston at Beach's Hope, near the locations and events of RDR1, that being New Austin and Mexico. We know that the story of RDR1 is tracking down the former members of his old gang, specifically Bill Williamson, Xavveya Escuela, and their old leader Dutch Vanderlyn. Dutch walked off at the end of American Venom mission after John kills Micah. After considering John is hunting down Bill and Xavveya as well, we know that the two of them survived the Pinkerton raid at the end of the RDR2 main story. We know this information from a newsletter called the Blackwater Ledger, specifically issue number 73, which features an article titled Notorious Bad Man Alive. The article reports that Dutch has been spotted in tall trees and is still on the run years after the collapse of the Vanderlyn gang. It also reads, a telegraph from Mexico reports that Xavveya Escuela is believed to reside in the mountain region there. Further, it also states that Bill Williamson is still alive and believed to be at large. So, most likely between 1899 and 1911, the three of those characters were still acting like outlaws, creating their own gangs and living the same life they have been living. But the specific thing I wanted to get into is why Edgar Ross took 4 years to get John Marston to hunt down his former friends and gang members. It's not like Ross didn't know where John was, as in the credits of RDR2 we see him overlooking Beach's Hope with his binoculars. So he knew where John Marston was. So why did he take so long? Well, Rockstar has never officially confirmed a theory, but there are quite a few good ones that I actually really like. One theory is that Edgar Ross needed time to locate the other scattered gang members. Most likely, once Ross had found Bill and Xavveya, they probably had enough consolidated power, or become high-profile regional problems requiring immediate federal intervention. Additionally, the Bureau of Investigations, which I touched on earlier in the video, in the Red Dead Redemption universe was formed by the US Attorney General, and Ross was actually appointed as its first director and the head of the Autonomous Investigative Unit upon its establishment in 1907. So with Ross being the head of such a new federal organization at the end of the epilogue, he needed to build up political power. The Bureau was still expanding its reach and authority, and Ross was smart and most likely waited until he had the political backing and resources to launch a sanctioned multi-state manhunt. Additionally, another good theory is that the Vanderlyn gang's old members probably weren't a prioritized target. Since the Bureau of Investigations was so new, Ross most likely had to prioritize targets to show the government that he was good at his job to build up his political power. So there are a lot of theories out there. My personal favorite is probably the Bureau of Investigations just being formed and Ross needed to build political power. So now we know a few reasons as to why Edgar Ross took 4 years to get John Marston to hunt down his old gang members. So with John Marston's character development, and the perfect setting of the stage for the narrative, the Red Dead Redemption 2 epilogue is one of the most underrated parts of the entire game. It does a wonderful job at concluding the main story of Red Dead Redemption 2 by hunting down Micah and allowing us to close many burning questions that we would have had at the end of Chapter 6. Rockstar did an excellent job at subverting the main feeling of the epilogue away from the main story to show that times have changed narratively. I believe the epilogue is one of the greatest examples of a conclusion and setup in gaming.